Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're doing something really cool. We're unraveling the anatomy of a prophecy, specifically Fyodor Dostoevsky's 19th century masterpiece, Demons. We're going to examine exactly how this incredibly dense, fascinating novel dissects the extreme dangers of radical ideology. And to help us visualize these massive, complex, philosophical clashes, we're using some awesome stickman-style animation. And I'll be your female guide, voicing this whole journey, breaking these massive ideas down into clear, memorable visuals. So get comfortable and let's unravel this masterpiece together.
Okay, let's dive into this with a really fascinating paradox. You see, Dostoevsky didn't actually set out to write the profound philosophical tragedy we know today. Nope. He initially just wanted to knock out a frantic, rapid-fire political pamphlet, mostly to make some quick cash and vent his frustrations. So you gotta ask, how on earth did a rushed piece of political commentary transform into literally one of the most prophetic literary masterpieces of the modern era? Well, to understand that, we need to look at the exact spark that lit the fire. Section 1, Inspired by True Crime, From Murder to Masterpiece. This wasn't just some abstract theoretical debate in a smoky room. Dostoevsky grounded his novel in a shocking real-world event. Back in the late 1860s, he was actually living in European exile. He was on the run, fleeing from massive debts left by his deceased brother, and his big dream at the time was to write a sweeping religious novel. But then, in November 1869, he picks up a newspaper and reads about a horrific true crime back in Moscow. A radical, revolutionary cell, led by a super charismatic extremist named Sergei Nikayev, had actually murdered one of their own, a young student named Ivanov. Dostoevsky was so profoundly disturbed by this news that between 1870 and 1872, he completely pivoted. He totally dropped his grand religious epic to urgently write Demons, directly confronting the political chaos erupting right in his homeland. Section 2. The Clash of Generations. Fathers and Sons in 19th Century Russia.
Now, that real-life murder wasn't just an isolated incident. Dostoevsky saw it as the violent climax of a massive cultural divide. And this brilliantly illustrates the clash between two very different generations. On one side, we have the 1840s generation, the idealists and romantics, represented in our story by the character Stepan Trofimovich. These folks were pretty naive, they fiercely defended art and beauty, but they were utterly disconnected from harsh everyday realities. Then on the other side, you have the Sons, the 1860s generation of nihilists and utilitarians, perfectly captured by Stepan's own son, Pyotr Verkovensky. This new generation was ruthless. They were totally materialistic, completely rejecting traditional morality and art in favor of violent political disruption. Dostoevsky's satirical warning here is absolutely clear. The romantic, pampered fathers actually completely unintentionally birthed the destructive radical sons.
To really grasp what these sons believed, we have to talk about something called rational egoism. This was the ideology dominating radical Russian youth in the 1860s. And honestly, it was a pretty bizarre amalgam of utopian socialism and Benthamite utilitarianism. Basically, it's the belief that actions are only right if they're useful or somehow benefit the majority. It attempted to entirely substitute traditional Christian morality with this hyper-logical extreme pragmatism. Dostoevsky was absolutely terrified that this specific ideology was systematically destroying the moral fiber of Russian society, because it could essentially justify any means, even cold-blooded murder, for a supposed utopian end. Section 3. The Tragic Center. The Enigma of Nikolai Stavrogin. As Dostoevsky kept writing, the whole political thriller aspect of the novel started to serve merely as a backdrop for a much deeper, much darker philosophical tragedy. And that brings us to Nikolai Stavrogin, the true hero, or, well, anti-hero of the story. What's absolutely fascinating is that Stavrogin underwent a massive metamorphosis while Dostoevsky was drafting the book. He literally started out as a simple, romantic, Byronic prop, just a standard plot device. But he evolved into this tragic, utterly hollow product of the Russian century. He's a guy plagued by a profound spiritual boredom. Stavrogin completely represents the spiritual crisis of the educated Russian elite, people who had absorbed all this Western culture but totally lost their connection to their native religious roots. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this chilling quote from a chapter that Dostoevsky's publishers actually suppressed for being way too shocking. Stavrogin says, "I neither know nor feel good and evil, and that it is just a prejudice. Listen, this isn't just standard teenage rebellion we're talking about here. Stravagin is carrying out a horrifying, sacrilegious experiment on himself. He's actively trying to abolish all moral distinctions in his own mind just to see what happens. And the result? A total, terrifying inner void. Section 4. Unlimited despotism, the terrifying endpoint of absolute freedom. Of course, that inner void inevitably spills out into the real world, right where abstract philosophical theories slam face first into horrific realities. The character Shigoliyev, who acts as the radical theoretician in the novel, notes to his own dismay. Starting from unlimited freedom, I conclude with unlimited despotism. This is probably the most famous line in the entire book, and it perfectly captures Dostoevsky's core warning. When utopian theories try to engineer a perfect earthly paradise by stripping away traditional morality and boundaries, they inevitably, almost mathematically, devolve into absolute tyranny and terror. Now, if you're sitting there thinking Dostoevsky was just exaggerating because he was a fiction writer, history actually backs him up completely. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels said this regarding the actual Sergei Nechayev, remember, the real-life murderer who inspired the whole book. They wrote, "These all-destroying anarchists, who wish to reduce everything to amorphousness and to replace morality by anarchy, carry bourgeois morality to its final extreme." This historical fact perfectly validates Dostoevsky's fictional portrayal. It neutrally shows us that Nechayev's brutal Machiavellian tactics were so extreme that even the leading figures of radical socialism at the time were utterly revolted by them, to the point where they actually kicked him out of their international organization.
Section 5. A prophetic masterpiece, a warning that echoed through a century.
Because of all this, modern Russian critics today classify demons under a very specific term, Roman preduprzhdenia, which roughly translates to a novel of warning. Essentially, it's a literary work that successfully predicts and cautions against the disastrous human consequences of contemporary ideologies. When historians and everyday readers look back, it's honestly mind-blowing to see exactly how accurately this 19th century story foreshadowed the devastating totalitarianism that would go on to sweep across the 20th century. So the crucial point is this: when Demons was first published, it actually temporarily ruined Dostoevsky's reputation with progressives, who totally thought he was just slandering them. Yet he so masterfully diagnosed how radical chic infiltrates and corrupts polite society. I mean, high society elites in the novel literally entertain these dangerous revolutionaries as a fad, completely oblivious to the real danger. Interestingly enough, despite the immediate backlash against the book, the new radical groups that emerged in the 1870s actively distanced themselves from the murderous methods Dostoevsky highlighted. Finally, and perhaps most empathetically of all, the novel acknowledges that these conspirators weren't all just mustache-twirling cartoon villains. Dostoevsky shows how even pure, innocent hearts can be tragically manipulated by fear, group psychology, and the intense pressure of an ideological echo chamber. And that leaves us with a really critical question for today. How do Dostoevsky's warnings about ideological echo chambers, the manipulation of pure hearts, and extreme radicalization still resonate in our modern world right now? When we look at how easily groups can justify the unthinkable in the name of a utopian future, it's pretty clear the demons Dostoevsky diagnosed haven't disappeared at all. They've really just changed their clothes. I highly recommend reflecting on how that dangerous leap from unlimited freedom to unlimited despotism might be playing out around us today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the ideas around you.